on a grand scale. From now on, keeping diaries on child development was real science, and a tsunami of diary keeping emerged, which reverberates till the present day. Darwin's sketch includes some observations on William's language skills developing, but hardly more than the 15 observations that Tiedemann had published almost a century before. Darwin stressed in particular the invention of new words by William, such as mum, to express the wish for food. Also, he noticed the instinctive use of intonation patterns, voice modulation, to express modes such as interrogation and exclamation. Here he concluded, repeating what he had expressed in The Descent of Man, that before man used articulate language, he uttered notes in a musical scale. The singing origins of language, that is, and also this kept echoing in the literature till the present day. The importance of Darwin's paper was not so much in its content, but in one swoop it made the study of child development a respectable branch of human biology. Diaries now appeared at an accelerated rate and in various languages. I just wrote a book on the history of psycholinguistics, and it also tells the story of this diary explosion. Here are some of the 19th century diaries which you will find discussed in that book. There's a whole list in a short period of time. It is from these early diaries that the first language statistics were derived. Doran in 1907 was the first to publish an overall statistics on the development of vocabulary size in children, based on more than 100 children. In the 20th century, this diary business went on full force. Here's a list of 20th century diaries. Here, Clara and William Stern, 1907 diary study, set the new standards for the decades to come. Clara and William Stern reported in much detail on the language development of their three kids, Hilde, Günther and Eva. Vocabulary development is one aspect of it, but a major part of the book is dedicated to syntactic and semantic development. In the following decades, a rich statistics development was gathered on syntactic complexity. Not only utterance length, but also varieties of syntactic types, such as coordination and subordination, and so on. When famous but Jewish William Stern was in 1933 dismissed from his Hamburg professorship, Clara and William went to Duke University, where William died in 1938. Clara went to New York, where she died in 1945. Their former student, Gordon Allport, took care that the diaries, the largest ever created, were deposited in Widener Library. However, nobody showed any interest in them, and their daughter Eva then moved them to Hebrew University. With Eva's help, we transcribed the full diaries in our Max Planck Institute and made them digitally available to the world. Then, really, the largest corpus of German language acquisition data. The intellectual break with the rich German tradition was complete after the war. Roger Brown doesn't even mention the Stern's work at all in his famous book, A First Language of 1973. I will return to that in a second. But first I should commemorate another occasion really very dear to me. 4 decades ago, in 1972, a few months after his 80th birthday, 50th birthday, take care, 50th birthday, Pat Suppies lectured in a Nuffic summer course, which my former supervisor, John van der Geer, had organized in The Hague. Duncan also taught in an earlier course there. I was on the organizing committee, and Pat lectured on formal grammars and automata. I had just returned from the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. I will be eternally grateful to Duncan, who had invited me there. During that year, I wrote my 3-volume book on formal grammars. And one thing I did there was discuss the work is writing on probabilistic grammars. So I was all tuned to Pat's course, and one thing he did indeed was discussing his work on probabilistic grammars. And that is the issue I want to address to finish my talk. So in my book I had included a chapter on probabilistic grammars and then further chapters on their applications in linguistics and psycholinguistics. In the dominant Chomskyan linguistic community of the time, that was simply not done. This is what Chomsky had to say about that. It must be recognized that the notion probability of a sentence is an entirely useless one under any known interpretation of this term. On empirical grounds, the probability of my producing some given sentence of English, say this sentence or the sentence birds fly or Tuesday follows Monday or whatever, is indistinguishable from the probability of my producing a given sentence of Japanese. It was Pat who not only pertinently and repeatedly argued against that curious position, but who also set the example. In the early 1970s, he was the first to do serious work on probabilistic grammars for children's speech.
Chomsky's politics is even worse.
That's my next talk. It was the only empirical work Pat's on probabilistic grammars available when I wrote my book. Pat's first applications were to Adams' corpus of utterances collected by Roger Brown and his co-workers for his book First Language. Brown had unknowingly continued the work of the Sterns, in particular their work in syntactic and semantic development. Pat's classic contribution to the study of language acquisition was two-pronged. He was the first to construct probabilistic grammars for a range of child language corpora. Not only Adams, but also corpora collected by his co-workers, the Nina corpus, so Léveillé, French, and Smith, Nina's corpus, Philippus, French corpus, Ericus corpus, and the small Chinese corpus. Here is Pat's very first probabilistic grammar for Adams' corpus. It was only the beginning. When you read all subsequent papers, you get impressed not only by the sheer amount of detailed work, but by the enormous constraints imposed by the probabilistic paradigm on feasible syntactic rules. Rules that seem obvious to the ordinary linguist just don't work, and other rules that are considered trivial do a lot of work. Pat's second important innovation was to supply these grammars with a compositional model theoretic semantics of the type discussed a moment ago by Stan Peters. That was the other thing not done in the Chomskyan linguistics of the day. Syntax was the thing, formal semantics was etude, it was just not done. Pat supplied each of these syntactic production rules with a semantic function, such as, say, identity, intersection, and so on. And these functions then combined following the syntax of the sentence to compose the meaning of the sentence as a whole. And again, the experience was that these semantic functions put further constraints on what could be a possible grammar for such a corpus. Let me close by saying that Pat was far ahead of his time with these important contributions to psycholinguistics. It took decades before the application of probabilistic grammars to large-scale corpora really took off. It is an established booming field now, both for developmental and adult corpora and in many languages. Its combination with model theoretic semantics, however, is still a rare commodity. Well, thank you, Pat.